Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mind Clickers. I'm a sport and exercise scientist from Melbourne, Australia, with a passion for esports performance, coaching, and overall mental well-being. I've been in esports for quite my life, previously competing in COD 4 Pro Mod and coaching StarCraft 2, whilst avidly loving CSGO and all FPSs. I created Mind Clickers to provide an insight into the psychological and performance demands of elite level gaming. This includes getting an insight from coaches, players, staff, org founders, and esports researchers about their respective domains. In the following episode, I chat with Hector Melendez, a strength and conditioning coach who is the founder of Road to Strength. Hector has spent most of his years in traditional sports and working with the general population. He's also the head of community fitness at Gscience, where he helps to create videos to help promote health habits for gamers that can be easily adopted before, during, or after a game. In his spare time, he also voluntarily helps out on an esports team to ensure that all players' needs are being adequately met. Hector and I chat about the current state of esports fitness and how teams have started to adopt fitness into training and why this is crucial for ensuring player longevity. We also chat about how gaming chairs, like ones with RGB, are make it or break for some players' performance. We also chat about Exergaming and the role it plays alongside traditional sport adoption. Hang on, did I mention games? Hello. Player 2 Secondhand Gaming is your newest favourite pre-loved games online retailer who specialise in all games pre-owned, from your retro classics to your next-gen games with anything and everything in between. They go through a vigorous cleaning process so you know that all your pre-owned games that you get are going to be working. As exclusive listeners of Mind Clickers, if you go on their site and find anything you fancy, you can use code MIND10 for 10% off your entire order. Thank you very much. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Season 2, Episode 9 of Mind Clickers, where it's time to click both heads in 2021. I'm joined here today by Hector Melendez, who is a strength and conditioning coach and founder of Road to Strength, and he's also the head of community fitness over at Gscience. How are you going today, mate?
How's it going?
Yeah, really good. How's everything over there in the USA?
Good. It's 9 o'clock. I think the UFC starts in about an hour. And probably watch the fights after the call.
Oh, good. Are you a big UFC fan?
Yeah. So funny enough, I was watching it religiously kind of back in high school. So this is more or less 15 years ago.
Right.
And I want to say within the last 5 years, I've kind of been really slow with it. I know enough of the fighters, more or less, but if you tell me who's on the card, probably have no idea anymore because I'm just that far removed. So.
Yeah. I'm not really the biggest expert on the UFC or any of those kind of martial arts. Only Taekwondo, really, because I used to do that. But
okay,
definitely a good watch for sure.
Yep.
So I guess we'll start off as how we usually kick it off over here at MC. Just a bit of an introduction about yourself, previous experience in traditional sport, and any experience in esports as well.
Awesome. So my name is Hector Melendez. I am a certified strength and conditioning coach and founder of Road to Strength, which is my personal in-person strength conditioning, where I work with the general population. I've been fortunate that a lot of them are actually much younger. So I would say my average age might be somewhere like in the early 30s, so between 31 to 33. But prior to that, I essentially worked in traditional sport at the college setting with some stints around the U.S. and more or less realized that the stress of collegiate sports is, it's not worth it long run. Mm-hmm. So I essentially I went into the private sector for a bit just to kind of work on some soft skills with people where. With traditional sport, you have to be kind of hard on people. It's almost like complete different, like the complete opposite, where you have to kind of work those soft skills a little bit with people because they're your boss at the end of the day.
Right.
And so over time, I realized that starting my own business was something I wanted to do. So I just wanted to figure out how to scale. I would actually travel sometimes before going into my normal 40-hour week, where I would actually bike and bring some equipment and see clients first thing in the morning. So I built it up from there to essentially renting out an existing gym right now,
Wow.
just to keep my overhead low and whatnot, and it's local.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're actually looking at moving, hopefully in the next month or so, into a bigger space, just because of COVID and the restrictions we have for safety. Um, and so, with that being said, over the course of the last, let's say, 2 years now, I've been really deep diving into the world of esports, just because I've enjoyed gaming myself, and that's been kind of like my mental clarity for a lot of what I do.
Yeah.
So I started playing Sonic 2. That was the first game I ever played as a kid, and I got it for Christmas. So it's like the Christmas gift that everybody always asks, "What's that? What's the best one you've ever gotten?" And I would say by far, playing Sonic 2 on Christmas Day was by far the best gift ever. Um, but over the course of the last 2 years, I wanted to be able to help a community of people um, where they enjoy gaming just as much as I do, and probably even more than I do. So get them a little bit healthier than what they already are. And fortunately, I just partnered up, or I'm working with Gscience as their head of community fitness.
Fantastic. Yeah. Sounds like you've really got your kind of step in the door, foot in the door, in regards to getting in regards to that kind of physical kind of domains in regards to strength and conditioning. Um, you mentioned the stress of collegiate sports. I can definitely, I don't have any first person experiences over there in the US with that kind of collegiate sports area, but over here in Australia, it's pretty tough. But I wouldn't say it's too stressful. So can you take us through some of those kind of domains in collegiate sports and why it's so competitive? Why everyone's trying to really get in there and be the best?
Yeah, so I can say I spent a little bit of time at a football D1 football program. So we have FBS and FCS. So FBS is kind of the major collegiate football
Mm,
teams across the country,
okay.
and the FCS is like the subdivision, where they do sometimes play each other, and inter kind of divisional play. So I guess think of like the Premier League and,
Hmm.
and its secondary league, and eventually they kind of all play each other in some way. Um, so it's kind of similar to that. So with the FBS, the big issue, especially if you're just working in football, is your job is, year to year. It depends on how well the coaching staff, because as soon as the head coach goes, everybody else goes.
Hmm.
Uh, Olympic sports is kind of the more desirable, um, because you essentially get a little bit more of you don't have to worry about your job being on the line. So essentially, it's not high risk, high reward like in
Hmm.
collegiate football,
Right.
but it's still, everybody wants to do that now as a result, because there's a safety net for them.
Yeah, gotcha. I remember a while ago I watched a Netflix series. I think it was called The Last Chance U. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but it was focused around kind of that in those kind of middle, in rural kind, not really rural America, but those developing kind of NFL teams. And it was really good insight into some of those teams and the kind of the dynamics and the mental dynamics, and also the physical kind of relationships that the players build with those coaches. Because out there, those communities are a lot more not nicely knit together. So it's really interesting to see those kind of dynamics that can evolve from those communities.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a good show to kind of show how everybody can come from different backgrounds, but can all somehow coexist in the same space.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, for
for sure.
sure. And over at Road to Strength, you mentioned that most of your clientele is early 30s, pushing into that kind of older adult, middle adult kind of category. Have you ever thought working with the younger athletes, working with youth?
Yeah, so I have spent a little bit of time. So my age range in terms of the audience that I've seen over the course of my career is, as an intern, right in undergrad, I essentially did like a recess class once a
Right.
week, on a Monday, and it would be the only like 3 hours of my day where I would actually drive just as long as I had to actually work. So it was pretty wild to do that, but the one thing I kind of walked away with when it came to that is, if you can't make it simple for a 6-year-old to understand,
Hmm.
good luck. Good luck trying to get into the field, because you have to talk to such a wide audience, and not everybody understands the same verbiage. So I can say the
Hmm.
same thing 5 different times, but it might mean differently for everybody that hears it. And then I think one of the older people I got to work with, I think they were in their late 60s, and they had knee replacement. So that
Mm.
was like the most interesting because I really had to take a step back more or less and see what the essentially how to solve the puzzle.
Yeah.
I look at fitness more or less as like a big puzzle, with all the variables, and essentially trying to be the mad scientist, and staying within my lane of my expertise, to make sure that people are feeling better.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I can kind of relate to that on that scale in regards to seeing those kind of older clientele in regards to having a knee replacement. So during one of my placements, so I actually did a placement here in Australia, at Exercise Research Australia. And throughout that placement, I got to experience kind of a piece of the pie of the allied health circle. So sometimes I'd be working with spinal cord injured athletes, older clientele, people, with, disabilities, really getting in and helping them to promote fitness and help to promote their quality of life. And that was definitely eye opening. And it's definitely really important, as you said, taking a step back and looking at everything from that external perspective, because that's when you can really see that exercise makes a difference, and how that makes a difference as well.
Yes, 100%, 100%.
Definitely. So, in regards to over at Gscience, being the head of community fitness, how are you finding everything there?
It's awesome. Honestly, I think the goal again, when it comes to esports, so the my training principle more or less is to try to make efficient movers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't, especially with gaming, I'm not trying to see if someone wants to go with a PR of 400 pounds on a squat. I just want them being able to get up off their chair for 5-10 minutes, let's say either every second or third game, and just move around a little bit, just because that long period of time of just sitting down is just not going to do them any good. And especially seeing how in the industry right now we are seeing a lot of these younger players
Mm-hmm.
retiring at early ages. I had a
Definitely.
conversation with some people yesterday, and there's a really good uh, understanding of kind of like the retirement age of esports,
Mm-hmm.
and or the longevity of their careers, and essentially they are actually shorter than that of an NFL player.
Wow.
So NFL player is about 3 years. So the fact that the average career is less than that,
Mm-hmm.
um, it, it's kind of mind blowing, and I guess it's a systematic issue, that needs to be resolved.
Yeah, for sure. And when you think of it in that kind of perspective, in order to increase that longevity of an esports career, all you need to do is start to just add in a couple of bits and pieces here and there. You need to just start sprinkling in some things, whether it be, doing what you're doing, having a couple of stretches before going into a big tournament, before going into a game, starting to do a little bit of, even a squats in the pre-game lobby, starting to look at nutrition, starting to look at, different things like meditation or, taking a step back. And if we can start to make that more unanimous in regards to everyone doing it, I think we can really start to see some really big differences within the esports scene.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think it needs to come from a top-down approach,
Mm-hmm.
of not just the coach, but even upper level management. So whether it's managers, ownership, really putting that piece of, I guess, investment towards the players, because at the end of the day, they want to see that they're making money. But you're not going to be making money when a year or two into a player's contract, they already have to retire. So you're losing a lot of money right there, and then you're
Yeah.
losing money because now you have to bring someone on board and run them through the ringer to catch them up to what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think that's even more of a financial burden than just making sure that they're getting the right resources, for their players.
Yeah, for sure. And how do you think the best way to get buy-in for some of these coaches is? Is it more so getting some guys to go in individually, help them go through some stuff, doing some stuff online, or even just, doing what you're doing, creating some content online that's so easily accessible that these coaches can look up and say, hey, here's some really good stretching videos. We can easily do this. This is how we can start to implement some of that. And then again, how do we try and change that mindset?
Yeah, so I think to change the mindset again, I think it's a top-down approach. So I work with a semi-pro team in the States, and what I do with them more or less is I reach out to the coach and manager of each game more or less that they're competitive in,
Right.
just to set up a meeting. and more or less try to make sure that we're all aligned and we're trying to approach everything in the same manner. So it's very similar to what you would do in traditional sport, more or less, where like you get the input from the coaches, so that way they feel like they've played a factor in their players' health. So it's not
Right.
coming from me 100%. I'm just almost being the like consultant, more or less. I guess is the
Mhm.
best way to put it. And here's my advice. We don't have to do that, but I think this is why it would be a much better idea to do so. And that way, giving them the autonomy to make that decision puts it on them. It puts it on me now to then be able to present that material to the players, because that's the next step, is essentially reaching out to the players as a team and getting their feedback, because sometimes you can see from the conversations that they have within each other, there's something that's going on, whether it's let's say the IGL is, just, 4 or 5 hours of playing, they're lethargic and they're not really giving the right calls, but no one else is really picking up that slack a little bit.
Right.
But he can still play at a higher level. That things like that, you want to be able to um, make sure that you're kind of all encompassing and really paying attention to what they're saying. So that's how I get buy-in for the coaches and buy-in with
Mhm.
the players. And then what I'll do is I'll just message out players individually to see how things are going.
Mhm.
Um, I'll give players an actionable step, and sometimes I always look at low-hanging fruit. So lowest hanging fruit is typically hydration and sleep. Two simple things that you can do without really having to try. Um, so with water, for example, um, I'll even say if they're drinking tea or coffee, just because water is the primary ingredient, more or less.
Mhm.
Um, and we can go over caffeine later on and whatnot. But with hydration, I ask them how much they're drinking. Sometimes it's 16, 20 ounces or so. So, okay, let's try to add another 16 to 20 ounces for tomorrow or later on today. So that way they can start to create that actionable habit.
Mhm.
Because once you start to increase that little by little, the bigger picture really kicks in. Um, and then with sleep, I asked them the factors of like how warm or cold is their space, their sleeping space. Do they have blackout curtains? I've even joked with some of them who have like live with their significant other, have their significant other pick the designs of the blackout curtains. I don't care what you do, but you need to have those so that way your room is really dark. And lastly, more or less, um, if you keep your phone in your room, I just tell people to turn it on silent, so that way it doesn't go off at like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and
Mhm.
now you're fully awake if you're a super light sleeper. Um, and then from there, again, it's the following week. Hey, how are these little steps going? Good, not good. If they're not good, let's figure out why, so that way we can replan and change that blueprint or that recipe up, so that way you can then be more successful the following week.
Yeah, I love that. I love the low hanging fruit approach because essentially you're ticking these boxes in things that are so easy to do. Hydration, looking at sleep, all these things are characteristic to fundamental living and they're quite easy to address. All it takes is, building, as you said, building a little bit of rapport with the guys, saying, hey, you're doing these. Can we start to implement something a little bit differently? What's our approach here? And as soon as we start to kind of dig deep and kind of explore that, that kind of rapport and that understanding starts to develop. And as soon as you get that kind of understanding, I think that's where the change starts to happen. If the change doesn't happen immediately, at least you have that understanding of change and the understanding of that change can happen. And even if it doesn't happen straight away, it's still there and it's still like growing and manifesting in the back. I think that's important, kind of planting the seeds. Um, uh, an interesting question I have in regards to hydration and sleep and all that. Obviously, it's kind of based on subjective reporting. So, have you ever had a situation where some athletes, may be saying, "Yes, I've been drinking, I've been doing this, I've been sleeping really well," but then haven't been?
Fortunately, I can say that hasn't happened to me, at least to my knowledge. But I know with that being said, uh, at the end of the day, I know how you feel if you hydrate just the slightest bit, like, and what it does to your performance from a cognitive standpoint. So if they're still feeling the same way they were before, chances are they're not changing.
Hmm.
you can make that assumption and essentially, really have that conversation with them and be honest. Because at the end of the day, my job is to make sure that they can perform at the best, that they can. Because especially like, where they're playing at a much lower level, they can
Hmm.
always get scouted. And that's the
Right.
nice thing about esports is like you can always get recruited to, bigger teams. So you can't do that if you're not performing to your best.
Especially if you're in one of those kind of sub tier teams and then get recruited into a bigger team, you have that understanding already of hydration, nutrition. You've built those foundations that's going to allow you to excel in the bigger teams as well.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think what esports is kind of similar to maybe like soccer or football, where it has an academy system, or like even baseball where it has a farm system. So my goal is to get them to understand how to be healthier, so that way when they go to a bigger team, they already have those kind of actionable steps that they've already accomplished. So that way now that coach, it's essentially maintenance for them. So it's really easy going. So I'm willing to
Hmm.
like set the foundation, really have to like beat it into them more or less. So that way towards the end, they can cruise along.
Yeah, right. You're building the house while they're paying the bills, basically.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
And when you start to see more and more teams adopting this approach, do you think that more and more teams, bigger teams, big organizations, are going to start to say, hey, some of these teams are, they're getting these kind of allied health professionals externally to help look at performance. How can we kind of increase things outside of gaming, and that's just going to increase more and more adoption?
Yeah. So I don't know anyone at the higher level. So like let's say like a TSM where I know they built a facility. I know Cloud9 has one. I think
Hmm.
FaZe has one as well. So I haven't really chatted with, if they have a coach more or less of that perspective. I know like TSM has a fitness center. Obviously, I'm sure with COVID that kind of changes things right now, but
Hmm.
I don't know from that point if it's they're hiring someone externally to come in, or essentially, hey, here's like, like what CrossFit does, like here's the workout of the day, just go and do
Hmm.
it more or less. So, it's kind of generic. Um, but again, I'll prescribe exercise as a last measure, believe it or not, with esports, just because again they don't need to be like super, they don't have to be half door Bjornsson, just, deadlifting 1,000 pounds. I
Yeah.
just want them to be able to play pain free, and still be able to play at a high level. So the basis of things are now going to have to kind of almost role reverse compared to a traditional sport athlete.
Yeah, right. So basically, just having a really nice holistic approach to it in regards to these guys aren't going to be going in powerlifting in the gym, doing 1 RMs every session, figuring out different powerlifting blocks and stuff like that. They just want to essentially maybe even do some body weights, and kind of so those kind of exercises. So, what kind of exercise do you tend to prescribe to some of these guys?
Yeah, so it's going to depend. Um, More or less on the idea of upper cross syndrome, so more or less the head's tilted forward, uh,
Hmm.
back upper back or like thoracic spine,
Right.
is kind of hunched over. uh,
Hmm.
what I typically will tell people as like a quick fix is when you stand up, think of pinching your shoulder blades back a little bit so your chest opens up. The reason why I say that is because essentially if your chest is hunched over, the musculature of your back is already stretched. However, you now just created really tight pecs, um, tight lats as a result. And so what you want to do is you want to almost pinch the shoulder blades to get the chest to open up. And because of the way we typically breathe, because we're always, fight or flight type
Hmm.
mode, essentially taking your shoulders and instead of shrugging up, you're anti-shrugging. So you're bringing your shoulders and bringing them as low as you can.
Right.
So that way you can get the chest to open up a little bit. Um, but also you'll notice a huge difference in how you feel. Um, so that's kind of something that I'll prescribe, as sometimes like a quick exercise. In terms of like physical exercise, body weight squats, push-ups are typically things I like to do. Um, I like to get some more mobility work, especially like in
Hmm.
between the shoulder blades. So any sort of quadruped or all four position push-ups or thoracic rotations. So that way, again, we can create more mobility in those shoulder blades, which will then help how the shoulders, elbows, and wrists feel when you're in your, gaming station.
Yeah, for sure. And what would you do in a situation where, say, for example, a player comes to you, they've been doing some of your exercises, the shoulder blades retraction, and they're saying, hey, it's really feeling good. And you're like, yes, okay. But then they want to say, I want to start to increase that. I want to start to maybe getting in the gym. I want to start to building on, some more of the fundamentals of exercise. In that situation, would it be more, okay, so how can we do that? Can we start to look at, designing a program? What would be the mindset there?
Yeah, so it would be probably designing more of a program, but it's going to be on the basis of, very simple, big bang for your
Mm-hmm.
buck type approach. So like, again, I like squats, I like push-ups just because of the muscular endurance aspects of it, and the fact that it's a body weight exercise that challenges you no matter what. And same thing with the pull-up. So whether it's a male or a female, I still like to get pull-ups because it's just, again, you in relation to your body weight. So, the best way to do it is either doing more pull-ups or lose a little bit of weight to be able to do more pull-ups. So it changes that barrier, so it's a little bit easier. And then, of course, modifying it however need be. I think that's the most important. So I won't have my athletes do a pull-up unless I know that they can do assisted pull-ups at certain, weights or bands
Mm-hmm.
before going to a full body weight pull-up.
Yeah, gotcha. I love that. I love that, just being able to easily implement like basic things, squats, body weights, pull-ups. They're all things that, don't require equipment in situations. You can just pull up, maybe, you do a bar, for example, but squats and push-ups can easily be done. I know back when I was, quite into bodybuilding back in, late high school, when I was playing quite competitively in COD 4, in the pre-game lobby, I just like do some push-ups on the ground, and then you'd hear me on the mic, okay, push-ups are done, let's go. And that'd be my like kind of little G up.
Yep.
So, really being able to implement some of those things is definitely crucial. In regards to posture, obviously posture is a big thing because obviously esports athletes are in their chairs for 6, 7, 8, upwards of 10, 12 hours a day. So you are going to have that kind of hunched over anterior dominance posture. So you do think, by going through and having a couple of these exercises, it's going to start to definitely increase their posture. What's the kind of mindset there?
Yeah, so I think, the really bad thing about the gaming industry, and I don't mean it so much as a negative, but I guess maybe constructive criticism, is they base their chairs on racing chairs.
The gaming chairs.
Yeah, I don't know. There's just something about it that just makes absolutely no sense to me,
Mm-hmm.
because especially like if you see a lot of racing seats, like in a car, you know, they're not completely straight up. They're angled a little bit, and like these
Right.
seats are like straight up. No one's spine can physically take that type of compression,
Mm-hmm.
especially over a long period of time. So, something like, let's say, lower back pain, getting a new racing seat is not, or a gaming seat isn't going to do you any favors. It's almost going
Mm-hmm.
to do the exact opposite. So, um, getting something that's a little bit more ergonomically friendly um, is something that I always will mention to players. Like, it's expensive, so I get it, but the long term ramifications of what you're going to get out of it is much more beneficial than the $100 seat that you can get, at whatever store or whatever. So, so with that being said, yeah, so I'll prescribe a lot of exercises like that. If they have lower back pain, I'll typically try to figure out why that lower back
Mm-hmm.
pain is happening. Because sometimes it could be a stability issue where like the
Right.
hips just aren't as stable enough. So we'll do a little bit more core work. To get the musculature to refire again, and that way reducing any pain or discomfort.
Yeah, definitely. I like that. I definitely think that it's a really good approach to kind of understand where, if they have lower back pain. If they do, then we can try and assess that. And if they don't, we can maybe try and implement further adoptions to try and make sure they don't have lower back pain in the future.
Mhm.
And you see the gaming chairs kind of like a meme within esports culture. Like when someone taps off, he's like, oh, he's got a good gaming chair. It's one of those things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's definitely, I think, the biggest part of it, I think, is marketing. A lot of gamers, casual or competitive, they all tune into, whether it be YouTube or Twitch, watch their favorite streamers. And it's that kind of, oh, okay, they're doing it. Well, I'm going to do it now. And it's that waterfall effect.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely a very interesting industry from that perspective, like how easy it is to just market these products.
Exactly.
Whereas like other industries, you try to do the same and it's like it takes a while to adopt it.
Yeah. Yeah, literally. All they need to do is just slap on a price tag and say performance.
Yeah, yeah. Gaming, RGB, $7,000 more than the regular chair.
Yeah,
You know, so
literally. If it's got RG, I once saw an RGB chair actually. I was
no.
thinking, oh,
Like for what reason? I mean, I'm not trying to have a rave in my
yeah.
my office as I'm gaming.
It,
So
it's literally just it's just aesthetics, and
yeah,
it's crazy. It's crazy.
it is.
One thing I was thinking about recently is kind of grip strength. So obviously within traditional weightlifting, strength training, we have a really big emphasis on grip strength, especially when we're doing bench press or deadlifts, to really ensure that we have a really good grip on the bar. So what's your thought process in regards to grip strength for esports athletes in regards to something like holding the mouse, being able to tap faster, have a bit more hand dexterity, even stamina, for example?
Yeah. So I know, for example, you could do a CNS tap test. So
Mm-hmm.
the nice thing is it's an app right on your phone. So whether you have iOS or Android,
Yep.
there's, and I'm not even suggesting a particular one. Just search, CNS tap test, and then just pick whatever is free because it's going to do the exact same thing regardless. And what I would say is do that for about a good 2 weeks. So do that probably first thing in the morning when you get up. The reason why I'm saying that is essentially just because your eyes are open and like you may be having a conversation with whoever doesn't mean your central nervous system or your CNS is actually on. The
Mm-hmm.
dial might be still at 1 when you really need it to be like, let's say, like a 7 or 8, really. So what the CNS tap test can do over, let's say, the course of 2 weeks is set a baseline as to your, let's say, your athlete readiness. Because whether it's traditional sports or esports, I consider them all athletes. So let's just say athlete readiness. And from there, even if they, let's say they want to work out, okay, where were you? And if it's within a deviation of, let's say 3 to 5%, okay, you can still work out, but here's what I want you to do, and here's why I want you to do it. So essentially, it's downgrading their workout, not because they couldn't do it, but knowing the stresses that are going to compound as the day goes on. I don't want this to essentially burn them out by the time that they're ready for their scrims,
Mm-hmm.
10 hours from now.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting. I haven't heard of the CNS tap test actually. I'll definitely have to have a look at it.
Yeah, so there's a CNS tap test, and then I've also used the again, I can't think of the contraption essentially, but you grip onto it more or less, and there's a little dial, so it'll tell you like how much pressure you're applying.
Oh, yeah.
And again, you do that for about 2 weeks, and that gives you a good, at least a starting baseline.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of determines again the athlete readiness, so that way they can be able to perform the way that they need to. Now, with improved grip strength, I think that can help with hand the mouse and whatnot, because like I have a small weight in my mouse, so that way like I can move a little bit faster. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, like it's so light that it's almost negligible. It's almost like if I don't have the weight in there.
Right.
So it can help strengthen it, but reduced carpal tunnel is kind of hard because there's different factors, whether it's anatomical,
Mm-hmm.
so where the nerves kind of go through. If those are too narrow, it doesn't matter how much mobility stretching you're going to do in your forearms, you can still come out with carpal tunnel issues. So all it's really going to do is it's just going to, if you're doing it right, you should be pretty mobile in those flexors and extensors of the forearm, which will then kind of alleviate any kind of tension that you're creating at the wrist.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't think doing, something like hand grip strength training is not going to directly minimize the effects of something like carpal tunnel.
Mhm.
I definitely think in order to reduce the onset of something like that, there's definitely got to be a lot more factors at play, a lot more implementation in regards to, looking at other things as well. And sometimes it can even happen just out of nowhere as well. I remember I did a placement as a physiotherapist clinic,
Mhm.
and there was majority of the people I saw was just office workers, purely just because of that kind of ergonomics as we talked about before. They weren't sitting up straight. Their desk wasn't really adequately ergonomic. Everything was too far away. And it's these kind of external environment things that we can start to, change that can really help to promote a better quality of life for our esports athletes. And I think it's something so easy and so doable. I don't know if you've seen, but I've seen a couple of gamers who have their keyboards literally on a 180-degree angle. So their keyboards
Yeah,
are literally vertical.
I've tried to do that. Like I feel like I'm like exorcism, like with the wrist. Like I just can't do it. It hurts.
It's
So
crazy, yeah. And I'm
yeah.
just starting to think like if they're playing, like I've seen most of those guys are pretty much like an FPS player, for example. If they're playing a game, like a best of three, that could be doing that for like 3, 4, 5 hours. What kind of underlying pain is that causing them?
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, that's the big thing to be. I guess that's the conversation to be had. Is
Mm,
they're playing for 3, 4, 5 hours. I, I come from the background of consoles, so I just built my PC about 2-ish years ago. So
right.
playing for like 6, 8 hours because I would do that for a while when Halo 5 came out, 6 years ago or so. Um, it's a lot different than a keyboard because you have to manipulate your hands in such a weird way compared to a
Hmm.
console where the controller is just designed ergonomically to fit in your hand properly so that way you're not manipulating those fingers in any kind of weird way. So I think it really is maybe whether it's increasing time in between matches or let's say it's a best of three series and they each
Hmm.
tie, it's 1-1, so sudden death now, and it's maybe having that sudden death, a half hour from that time frame, so that way it gives them time to roll out their forearms, step away, grab water, kind of check out for a little bit,
Hmm.
um, and then from there, be able to return back. So, kind of similar to like an office worker,
Hmm.
someone who's on the computer all day, just because they're not they're not playing at a high rate as your typical, let's say, PC gamer is. Doesn't mean that they're not doing the exact same thing. So they are sitting for long periods of time. They are sitting in incorrect posture positions, more or less, and uh,
Yep.
stepping away sometimes can allow that brain to just reset and think of the puzzle in a very different way or a different approach that can, obviously lead to probably better success.
Definitely, yeah, completely agree with you. My first episode I did was with Ubisoft, so one of the main League of Legends junglers over here in OCE for the Direwolves previously, and he talked about when he went to the big tournaments or competed at Worlds, for example, going on stage playing the best of fives. Gradually, you start to have that onset of cognitive fatigue, and it just starts to really overrule you. And it's really interesting because you're going to start to have that cognitive fatigue, and as you have that cognitive fatigue, suddenly everything else will probably maybe drop. Maybe your posture will start to drop. Everything else will become a lot more relaxed because you just can't be bothered. And then you have the added stress of the game. You have the added stress of the tournament, the prize pool, the everything that's going on. There's so much stress, and I think that it's crazy.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there's a lot of stress on players for a bunch of different reasons. So
Hmm.
again, as a practitioner, at least in the, let's just say, the allied health space, more or less, we want to make sure that we can kind of reduce all those variables so that way they can focus on what they're getting paid to do, essentially.
Definitely. And it makes me think like, we have in regards to, for teams, performance teams and, all these kind of external people helping with the big teams. But what about like the very small teams where they don't have that kind of help? They don't have that regulation even. They're gaming for a lot longer hours. They're trying to get into those higher levels. Is that a lot more dangerous for some of these players?
It's kind of hard to say. I think the first thing I would say is a lot of these, tier one teams, let's just say, they have the ability to hire, let's say, their sports medicine staff. So they're
Hmm.
nutritionists. Some of them have chefs. Some of them, have personal trainers or strength conditioning coaches, physiotherapists or physical therapists in the States.
Just throw
Uh,
them all in.
yeah, exactly. So I think they have everything that they need a la carte. Whereas these smaller teams don't have that. And I think that's where the most opportunity lies within the industry is working with these smaller teams, even if that means you have to volunteer. So like I volunteer some of my time
Hmm.
to this team that I support just because I know what they want to do is kind of it aligns with what I want to do and how I want to help people. So, with that being said, I think that's a really important thing. And if, it may not be for everybody. So I think, the big thing is like, everybody kind of sees what passion, go with what your passion is. And sometimes that can be the thing that ruins it for your career where you'd never want to do it again. So you really have to make sure that this is something that you do want to do because it's a really hard industry right now to get into
Hmm.
because again, from a financial standpoint, not all these teams are, pocketing millions of dollars every year.
Right.
They're lucky if they're net zero. Um,
Hmm.
so you want to be able to help them, and if that means volunteering some of your time, then do it because that's gonna just look good on the resume if you want to move up in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. Completely agree. All of my previous experience within StarCraft 2 just has been purely voluntarily, just because they've actually reached out to me. They've said, hey, I'm starting to get so stressed in games. I'm starting to tilt. And I think, tilting and saltiness is a completely other topic.
Hmm.
But, just being able to, have that kind of understanding that some players, a lot of players, some of them really want some help. Some of them might not, and that's okay. That's fine. As long as help's available. I think that's the key crucial component to the solution. That help is available, and ensuring that help's available means that some players can reach out and they can get it. And if they can get it, then they can maybe perform better. They can reduce their injuries. They can be increase their quality of life. And I think that's one of the small puzzles to the jigsaw.
Exactly. Yeah, I think if you can solve that puzzle, you're in good shape.
Yeah, for sure. We talked a little bit earlier about in regards to the subjective measurements when you were talking about your sleep and your nutrition or with the hydration actually. What's your thoughts on in regards to objective measurements in esports? If we start to hook teams up with heart rate monitors, with breathing, with eye tracking, how can that really benefit others from a performance perspective?
Yeah, so I like the idea of heart rate tracking.
Mm-hmm.
I know within traditional sports, like we have things like Polar, who've kind of led the forefront within GPS and how it's monitored on, let's say, a field. So it can give you all the variables that, player X ran down, 10 miles an hour on this particular, and
Mm-hmm.
you can match it to the play that they're going to be in formation, for example. So you can then say, okay, he went too slow or he went too fast. And again, I think this is where in traditional sports, they're just starting to use sports science practitioners essentially. So data
Mm-hmm.
analysts that just look at data and spew it to the coach and say, here's what we see, here's what they're doing, and here's the approach that we believe is going to be best for them. Um,
Yep.
so I do like the idea of heart rate tracking. What heart rate tracking can also do, and I think this is probably where I know we were in a chat a couple days ago, and I kind of hopped in towards the end, and it was essentially the idea of like practice um, within particular games. Let's say
Mm-hmm.
if PUBG, as an example, had a practice mode where you practice certain scenarios with your team, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's you're the top three and the circle is this small, and here's the scenario that they're presenting you. How do you go about
Mm-hmm.
that? Just so that way you can condition that player a million times over so that way when they do get into that scenario they know exactly what to do. They know the call outs that they're going to have to make in order to essentially just outplay and and win the game of mental chess essentially.
Completely agree. I love that. I love the fact that if we have some adoption, widespread adoption in all games, League of Legends, all the FPSs, Overwatch, PUBG, on being able to kind of pinpoint, break down, hyper specific scenarios, I think it's going to be extremely beneficial. For myself personally, when I used to play PUBG, as soon as I get to 5, 10 alive, that's where the heart rate spikes. That's where I start to stress out because I haven't gotten to that. I haven't been exposed to that environment, that situation over and over again. And I think it's crucial. I think it's a big idea, and I think if we start to have this adoption widespread, we start to have that conditioning, that stress inoculation.
Yep.
For some of those guys, it's going to be amazing. I reckon. I really think it is.
Yeah. So I think heart rate tracking can do pretty well with that. Just because, again, the more stressed out you are in a scenario, that heart rate's going to elevate. And again, we all know kind of what the heart rate, when it elevates, what that means to the person. Like, essentially, they kind of close in a little bit more and almost get that tunnel vision where they have that focus, but they lose track of what's around them that could actually possibly be of benefit to them. Breathing, I think that's also an important piece. And I know with breathing, what it just does is just down regulates the person. Again, being on a computer and being in, like, let's say like PUBG as an example, you're in a fight, literally a fight or flight situation for 25 minutes. So your stress is already pretty high, and all you need to do is, again, get that marginal gain, that 1% that another team doesn't have. So if breathing is what causes that, that again can lead to being a win or loss. And eye tracking, I'm not all that like knowledgeable with eye tracking and what it does to player, whether it's from a conditioning perspective, like they can see how their eyes are kind of moving across the screen and periphery and whatnot. But I'm sure there's probably something to be said of that, again, having that tunnel vision and or not tunnel vision, and being able to see that periphery that you need to kind of compete further.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think breathing is one of those ones that could be pretty crucial. Definitely in regards to, say, for example, it's a best of 5, it's 2-2. We're coming down to the last couple of rounds. It's a 1v4, for example. I'm kind of bringing this off from something I spoke to a player, and he told me he did. I'll let that out. Something he did. And he actually held his breath. So he held his breath for the full 45 seconds of the clutch. And then afterwards, he said he was super lightheaded just because he was so hyper-focused in that situation. And he was really just going hard on it. So I think, if we start to have a lot of people who are really, holding their breaths, going into the next round, maybe they're not going to be able to have that kind of, settle back. They're going to be over-aroused. And I think that over-arousal is going to be, detrimental, especially if we are looking at, the last couple of rounds in the match, and how that can actually play out to the end of the game.
Yeah. I think it's funny, when I was when I had my small stint in grad school, I wrote a paper essentially on the performance curve. So essentially, there's that optimal level of that performance curve, which is at the top typically, and it's split up into thirds. So the first third, you're not as excited and you're not performing as optimal, but the last third essentially is like you're overly stimulated, overly excited, and therefore that's why your performance deteriorates as a game goes on. Whereas you almost have to stay, really, it's kind of staying even keel, more or less being a silent killer. I guess the best way to put it, where they're not expecting you to do well, but you just hide underneath the radar and then all of a sudden just strike very quick.
Yeah, definitely. I love that there is so kind of different models that can look at different things. We have the inverted U hypothesis, we have the drive theory, the catastrophe theory. The catastrophe theory being the one that does include cognitive anxiety and takes into account that. I definitely think it's important to start to look at all these things, and I think the biggest thing to consider as well is that it's very individualized. So one player isn't going to be the same as the one next to them. You might have a couple of players on the team, one player who really thrills under that pressure. If in a 1v4, they're really driving, that they're really hyper-focused, they're entering the flow state, for example. Or you might have another player who's, more of a support character. they land into a 1.4 and they just absolutely blunder because they're not used to that kind of situation. They're mentally not really prepared for that. So I think it's definitely an area that's really interesting to look at.
Yep.
In regards to VR gaming, I just want to get your thoughts on this because I think it's a very interesting area that's on the rise, especially in regards to being able to, I guess, essentially play a game whilst also getting some physical activity benefits. So what are your thoughts on VR gaming, and is this going to maybe make it into the wide stream competitiveness where we're going to see VR athletes on Twitch, playing CSGO, for example?
That'd be hilarious if you could get that to happen, essentially. Yeah, I think VR, I've had this conversation. I think VR has made leaps and bounds, but I think that there's still something about it that they're missing that might take them to that next level, where then it could eventually become, let's call it just esports ready.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that thing is, just because I personally haven't used VR all that much, but just hearing from some clients that do use it, they think it's great because like one of my buddies like just throws it on, goes on to like YouTube VR and just goes fishing in Korea. He's not even like he's nowhere in Korea. Like he's 20 minutes north of where I am, and
Yeah.
Korea's a full day's flight essentially. So I think VR has a lot of great things. I have seen something along the lines of a VR headset where you're essentially harnessed into this little, let's say a dot, and the dot's probably, maybe like 2 feet in diameter or so.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually is a trackpad, so you can walk on it, and it's just like you're moving in a game.
Right.
So you're not using that analog stick to move you forward because you're doing that on the trackpad. I think that would be
Mm-hmm.
pretty cool to use that as a feature more or less for like, let's say a CSGO or a Call of Duty, some of your FPS games. But with that being said, I don't know. I think being able to know your space is going to be the biggest thing because I mean we've
Yeah.
all seen those fail videos where someone thinks they're climbing, and then all of a sudden they just go face first right into the floor.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like VR gaming. I've seen it with sim racing, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty cool. I went to my
Definitely.
I went to my first PAX, so not last year, but the year before. So that's 2019 now,
Mm-hmm.
and they had two large lines. Essentially, you sat in what looked like a go-kart with a VR headset, and the go-kart was actually hooked up to actuators. So if you put the brakes on, the front of your go-kart essentially just dipped down, just like it would in a
Hey.
normal high-speed car. So it's kind of cool seeing those little things where now it creates a little bit more of an immersiveness
Mm.
to the experience.
Yeah, and I think that really opens up a really big kind of category. Are we going to see more of a widespread adoption for gaming for traditional sports? Are we going to see, I think there are quite a few, because a couple of my friends are really into sim racing. They've got quite a big setup. They love the F1, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And they told me that a couple of F1 players, on their downtime, just jump onto sim racing
Yep.
because it replicates that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I don't think we're going to see tennis players playing a tennis game because I don't think that quite is specific.
Yep.
But yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, I know with again because of COVID, I know NASCAR did kind of some racing sim
Wow.
like a season more or less, and they've essentially kind of created it into an esport where a lot of
Wow.
big teams are competing in it. I know F1 did that last year with like Lando Norris kind of being he was like one of the better. Him and
Mm-hmm.
Russell were two of the better like sim racers, considering that like they're always like in the middle of the pack. They're not competing for pole or anything or top three, but it was
Mm-hmm.
funny seeing that transition between sim racing and real racing, like how much of a difference that makes.
And I think what comes to mind is something like the Le Mans. So it's 24 hours. Being able to, not everyone's going to be able to drive around a track in real life for 24 hours all the time.
Yep.
But being able to have a VR setup in your room, a sim racer in your room, you're going to be able to build that kind of tolerance to be able to understand, that kind of mental cognitive effect of racing and sitting there and being hyper focused for such a long period of time.
Yeah, I think I if I'm not mistaken, within the last few weeks, there was a 24-hour endurance race. But essentially, like just like the like Le Mans, more or less, you have like three or four, drivers, or one, depending on how big of an event, you have a gentleman driver,
Hmm.
racing. But I know with the esports variation, I believe it's almost something very similar where you have about four drivers, so you just alternate, X amount of hours, and that's about it. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see sports like that where that transition to esports is so much easier than a football, than a soccer. Like you can't just like have, I know 2K, like NBA 2K is trying to do something
Right.
of that nature, but you're not going to get 11 guys to play American football and say, hey, you're going to be the center and that's the only position you can be. And they're going to be like,
Right.
well, this sucks. Like I can't do anything. So it's definitely interesting to see what the future holds within esports.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you look at it on the flip side, in regards to something VR for like rehabilitation, for example, being able to kind of get into a game if you've done something to your arm, for example, whatever you've done, and being able to gradually have those kind of movements. That's, for example, if you have a clientele that doesn't really like doing the exercises, but they like gaming. Being able to get them and jump on into a VR, it kind of takes away that mindset that I am exercising, but actually I'm gaming. So I think there are a lot of different properties that Exergaming or VR gaming can have. I know that I've seen on LinkedIn kind of a thing where you have it on the roof and it's onto a wall, and basically you can hit the targets on the wall. Like for example, if you're playing soccer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that gaming is making a bigger impact into kind of the industry as a whole.
Yep.
And it's going to be really awesome to see where we go from here.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I know, like, Nintendo does a really good job with this, where they do, they have like Ring Fit Adventures,
Mm,
you know, way back when
yeah.
when the Wii came out. That's when they were the first really to like
Mm,
gamify, more or less, if you really think about it, gamify fitness. Um,
yeah.
and so, like I have a buddy that just, he plays on his Switch all the time, and he's like, hey, should I get this? Hey, if that's your barrier of entry to just be healthier, go ahead, go get it. Like that's perfectly fine. You don't need to go to you don't need to go on a treadmill, or do any of that stuff, or like even like Pokemon Go. I know like right
Right.
now they just
Exactly.
had the commercial with like Post Malone doing like a concert, like Pokemon Stadium or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
so I remember playing around with that a little bit just to see the gamification of fitness
Right.
essentially. So
Yeah, and I think I had a brief chat to you with Sweatcoin. I think it was.
yes,
Um, yeah.
yeah, no, I use it honestly just because I just want to see how the platform works.
Hmm.
I think it makes a lot of sense because most people are always doing like the 10,000 steps. So with
Hmm.
that being said, why not, make a little bit or be able to get things that you want, with it. It'd just be cooler to see if you can use that currency towards like real things, like I don't know, groceries, like buy
Yeah.
produce, things like that. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, I think if we can have more of a widespread adoption, I mean, cryptocurrency as a whole, there's so many up and coming developing projects. It's a big topic,
Yeah, for
definitely.
sure, for sure.
Um, in regards to, I guess, the future from here on out, what are your current goals in regards to esports or traditional sports as well? Are you looking to take your volunteer work, continue doing that, build on your skills within esports, maybe trying to get onto a bigger team, or maybe just really focus on your traditional sports and helping your clientele, whilst also having your foot in the door in esports as well?
Yeah, I think what I want to do here is, I think so I've been following Gscience for a couple of years, so so I kind of knew Ryan a while back, and we had conversed back and forth for a bit, and that was when I was kind of working in wellness and starting to look at my business and like trying to go with that full time, and see where I can go with that to at least build the financial piece that I need in order to then do the things that I would want to do outside of that, essentially.
Yeah.
So now that I'm here, 3 years later, 2 years later with Gscience, I think that is almost the perfect marriage.
Hmm.
in terms of ideas and how I want to progress as a professional in esports. Not necessarily working with a team. Like, let's say I'm the official, strength conditioning coach for TSM or for FaZe or for Ninjas in Pajamas, as an example. But I'm helping as many people as I possibly can,
Hmm.
and giving, trying to create that widespread adoption of being a healthy gamer and what it is to be a healthy gamer.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. I love the passion, mate. I really appreciate that. I definitely think a lot of mindset towards some of the industries is that, say, for example, if you're working in sports, the end goal is to get to the elite. You have to be working with the elite. That's the goal that everyone gets to. And I saw a really good post the other day. It was I can't quite remember it off the top of my head, but it was something like you can work with an elite sports and not get much of a reward, but you can work in community health for a day and get the biggest impact and change someone's life. So I definitely think, being able to have that kind of forefront in your business and being able to have those kind of goals in that direction that you understand is awesome. And I love it, mate.
Yeah, thanks. I think for anyone who wants to do this, I think the first thing you should do is just learn to be an educator. You want to be able to
Hmm.
teach people, because the goal, and I know this sounds kind of contrary to running a business, you want them essentially to eventually leave you having a set of tools that they can now use for the rest of their lives.
Hmm.
Whether they want to, reach out to you and kind of get a check in and whatnot, that's one thing. But your goal isn't you're going to be working with someone for 25 years of your professional career. You may see them for, 2, 3, 4 years. And,
Hmm.
once that's done, then it is what it is. So I think that's the biggest thing, is being able to educate people,
Hmm.
in terms of what to do, because bring them to the water, you can't force them. But when they figure it out on their own, that's kind of the parent moment kicks in. You're excited.
Yeah, definitely for sure. I can completely agree with that. I think in regards to my goals, career wise, I'm a lot more focused currently. I'm doing my postgraduate in rehabilitation counseling. So I'm really helping to get in there within that kind of community sense, and helping people that are a little bit disadvantaged, helping people who don't have as much opportunity, and then using mind clickers as kind of that outlet into my esports, because obviously I'm really passionate about esports. Gaming, however long, many years, and being able to have people like yourself and other esports, people involved within health and well-being and fitness, on to share some experiences and share some insights and really help a couple of gamers, because I've definitely had a couple of really positive messages from a couple of people. For example, after having Violetta on, I heard a couple of guys, "Hey, I'm going to start to do some stretches now. I'm going to start to adopt a little bit of healthy eating. I'm going to start to take a walk in between games." It's those little goals, those little wins that you take along the way, which I think that makes the big solution.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Especially with the idea of like nutrition. And I know everybody
Mm-hmm.
has their opinion on nutrition and whatnot, but the way I teach it with people is behavior. I'm not a registered dietitian, so I can't write a meal plan, but I can look at what people are doing and essentially
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, this looks fine. Here's how I would adjust it. Instead of taking, the metaphorical grenade and just rolling it in front of what it is that you're doing. Because chances are
Mm-hmm.
you probably already have a foundation that you don't even realize. And now from there, it's just how do we maximize that? So that way, again, you're doing what you need to do. So that way you can then return into your game and be able to play and excel at the rate that you want to. So it's doing all the back end work, so that way the front end work is pretty simple.
100% agree. Definitely agree, mate. I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Leading into the end of the episode here, any kind of takeaway messages that you'd like some of our listeners, some of our players who are, competing, some of them are competing professionally, a couple of key takeaways just to take away from the episode to try and get a bit more of a holistic understanding.
Yeah. So what I would say right away, make sure you're sleeping. If you're putting in, I hope you're not putting in 10, 12, 15 hours a day gaming, because again, that's not how you become, a well-rounded athlete. It's only going to lead you to burnout, and I know burnout is, the number one reason why people leave. So I want you to be able to play for as long as you can and essentially not get that burnout. So just try to optimize everything else so that way it allows you to focus on the things that are important to you.
Fantastic. Absolutely love it. And for everyone listening, where can we find you on all of your socials?
Yeah, so I just started Esports Hector on Twitter, just
Awesome.
because as soon as I went with Gscience, I needed to I realized I should create something secondary to my business page. And right now, I'm starting to look at YouTube gaming as a means to start streaming some content between
Mm,
fitness and gaming. So I'll probably be on there. So I don't have anything just right now.
perfect. No worries. I'm sure that when you start to get into that kind of domain, I can update everything in regards to the show notes and the episode, and we can have everything fresh there as well.
Awesome. Awesome.
Fantastic. It was an absolutely pleasure having you on today, Hector. Really going
Likewise.
through some of the key things in regards to esports, in regards to physical fitness, in regards to the adoption of esports, sports science, exergaming. I think we touched on quite a bit of a couple of topics today that really can provide a really good couple of takeaways for some of our players and people listening.
Yeah, I felt like that was a good conversation. So thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you very much, and take care for the rest of the day.
Yes, you too.
And thank you very much, as per usual, for tuning in to another episode of Mind Clickers with your host, Lachlan. Really awesome episode with Hector today. Just digging deep and ripping apart some of those physical education aspects and how they can be incorporated into esports to ultimately help longevity for some of these esports players' careers. And as per usual, don't forget to check out our sponsor, Player 2 Secondhand Gaming. They've got a lot of new stock in nowadays, some modern games, some old games, and everything for every gamer. And remember to use code MIND10 for 10% off your entire order. They've got something for every gamer.